Lesson 4, your basic camera controls, exposure and focus. Using your phone to take photos, pretty much everything is automated. It's programmed to expose and to focus well, whatever the lighting conditions. Taking photos with your camera, you have pretty much the same option to do everything fully automated. But this kind of defeats the purpose of using a camera. Learning to manage exposure and focus helps you to be much more creative with your camera. Good photos are usually well exposed and the subject is in sharp focus. Controlling these aspects of photography is fundamental. Learning to manage exposure and focus takes study and practice. That's why there's a lot of lessons in this course dedicated to these two topics. To take a well-exposed photo, the right amount of light must enter the camera and affect the sensor inside the camera. If too much light comes in, the photo is going to be too bright or overexposed. If not enough light comes in, the photo will be dark and underexposed. There are 3 controls to manage the exposure. These are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. You'll learn a lot about these during this course. Using your phone on the default setting to take photos, it will manage the exposure based on what it's programmed to do. You may not even be aware that there's anything to getting a good exposure if you use your phone like this. There are options to managing the exposure on your phone, but the controls are not always easy to adjust. Taking photos with your camera, there are more options for managing your exposure. You can choose to let your camera automatically balance the exposure, much the same way that your phone does, or there are other options where it's semi-automated or you can control it manually. Managing the exposure controls on your camera is generally much easier than managing them on your phone. Learning to manage your aperture, shutter speed and ISO settings is one of the key aspects to good photography. This is where you can make a lot of creative choices. It takes practice, but it is worth the effort because you can make much more creative photos when you're in control of your exposure settings. Getting photos in sharp focus is much more critical when you're using your camera. When you use your phone to take photos, most of your composition is going to be in focus all the time unless you're focusing in really close to your subject. When you're using your camera, you have more options to manage when some of your photo is in focus and some of it is out of focus. What is most important is that your main subject, or at least part of it, is in sharp focus. Focusing can be automatic or manual, and you can manage various aspects of how your camera focuses. The choices you make about focusing can depend on whether you're photographing a static subject or a moving one. There are a variety of options for what part of your image to focus on, and you'll learn more about these in upcoming lessons. Exposure and focus are fundamental to good photography, so I'll concentrate quite a lot of my teaching in this course on these topics. Lesson 4, your basic camera controls, exposure and focus. In this exercise, you'll learn more about good exposure and well-focused photos. Choose a subject to photograph that's outdoors and is not moving. One that you can move around and photograph from different angles will be best. Look through your viewfinder and lightly press the shutter release button, but not so hard that it takes a photograph. This activates the camera's autofocus. When you do this, you may hear the camera beep, letting you know that what you're focusing on is in focus. It will also give you some visual display in the viewfinder or on the monitor. It may be in the form of a rectangle or a few rectangles, or an overlay of colour outline over the area of your subject that's in focus. Check your camera manual or do an online search if you're not sure about how your camera manages this. Look at what part of your composition your camera's auto-focusing on. Is this the part of your subject that you want in sharp focus? Most of the time it will be, but there are times that the camera will not focus on the point you are most interested in looking at and seeing in sharp focus. How to manage where your camera focuses is covered in lessons 7 and 8. Move around your subject. Take some where the sun is behind you and some where the sun is in front of you. Practice doing this and you'll improve your photography. Look at the photos on your computer and compare how they look. Are some brighter and some darker than others? Where is the sun in relation to the subject in the most well-exposed photos? How does your subject look in the photos with the sunlight coming from behind it? The exposure of these photos may be more interesting if you take them early in the morning or later in the day when the sun is low in the sky. Save 2 or 3 of your best photos from this exercise to your favourites folder, and don't forget to take a few with your phone as well so that you can compare the differences. Main points from this lesson are: exposure and focus are fundamental camera controls. You can manage both manually or automatically. Practice this to improve your photography. Review the photos you take and check them to see if they're well focused and exposed. If they're not, think about what you can do to improve.